Hey, Soda Crab, there's someone here to see you.
Hello, Soda Crab.
Oh my god, Jet the Hawk, you're alive?
Unfortunately not. I am Jet the Hawk's twin brother, Jeff the Hawk.
Excuse us for a second. Where the hell did you find this guy?
He kinda just walked up to me and said I had beautiful eyes, like his brother told him before.
That's vaguely sexual.
Aren't all twins?
Wait, actually, that reminds me. Fire Emblem, the Sacred Stones. The 8th one. Yeah, this is quite the order I'm going in, isn't it? Sacred Stones was the last Fire Emblem game released on the Game Boy Advance, only 6 months before the jump over to home consoles with Path of Radiance's release in the US. By virtue of using the exact same engine and having a lot of the same assets as the two preceding GBA Fire Emblems, this is the technical pinnacle of the series on the system. That's right, what you're seeing before you is peak human progress. Everything we've done since, like the moon landing, World War II, and the release of Pikmin 3, has been a failed attempt to achieve that same high. Being the most fully featured and robust entry on the most moddable engine makes Sacred Stones the perfect base for all sorts of creative ROM hacks and kooky randomizers. The fuck you mean he's a chicken? But we're not here to talk about mods. No, we're here to discuss Sacred Stones in its pure, raw, unadulterated form. Because if not me, then who else? Now, what do I mean with that title? What the hell am I talking about calling this game a gray sheep? Well, for about half a second when I was conceptualizing this video, I was tempted to call Sacred Stones the black sheep of the Fire Emblem series. You know, something that very clearly stands out from the crowd. But I immediately changed my mind when I remembered. Oh yeah, Gaiden exists. If Gaiden were a sheep, its wool would make the infinite void of space look bright in comparison. Of course, there's also Thracia 776, but I don't even think that game qualifies as a sheep. It's some fucked up cryptid homunculus designed as a psyop, the purpose of which I cannot even begin to divine. Compared to that, Sacred Stones feels downright normal. After all, it's on the Game Boy Advance, and the entries on GBA are peak Fire Emblem iconography for me and many others. FE6 was supposed to be something of a soft reboot for the series, introducing an entirely new universe and feeling like it contains a lot of FE1's DNA. FE6 and to some extent FE7 really just feel like Fire Emblem synthesized to its essence and brought forward into the then modern era. When I think of Fire Emblem, I think of the GBA games. It's like America and Apple Pie, or Chipotle and E. coli, or the Soda Crab YouTube channel in months-long unannounced hiatuses. A GBA Fire Emblem can't be a black sheep. These are the baseline for all of Ramkind. But Sacred Stones, despite sharing that iconic DNA, borrows a surprising amount of its identity from Gaiden, while spicing it up a lot with its own ideas that make it feel truly distinct from its GBA counterparts. That right there is what makes Sacred Stones so unique and charming to me from the outset. It's an interesting and alluring blend of the familiar and the innovative, taking some of Gaiden's best and most unique ideas and recontextualizing them into a more traditional Fire Emblem experience. It's clearly different from its peers, but without standing in such stark contrast that it immediately leaps out at you at first glance. It really is Fire Emblem's gray sheep. Or should I say, two gray sheep? Or more accurately, two cyan sheep, who are twins. Except instead of a sheep, one of them is a hydrogen bomb, and the other one is probably still just a sheep. Sacred Stone stars twin protagonists Erica and Ephraim. Despite what the memes, their interactions, and a lot of very suspect subtext may tell you, they are, in fact, not boning. Erica's identifying characteristics include being a girl, weighing 5 pounds, being sword-locked, having overcooked ramen noodles for arms, and possessing the IQ of a microwave oven. Ephraim's claim to fame, on the other hand, is being a Giga Chad, game-soloing, lance-wielding demigod who can take on entire armies single-handedly in both gameplay and in canon, like some fucked-up cyan-haired medieval anime version of Kazuma Kiryu. In true Fire Emblem fashion, the game begins with the two protagonists being immediately orphaned, with what I think may be a record for quickest father-killing in the series. Within minutes of creating your save file, King Fado is executed on the spot by the once friendly, now invading Grotto Empire. I know it's kind of confusing, Fado rhymes with Grotto, but they're different things. Also, in true Fire Emblem fashion, there's more to this sudden invasion than geopolitics. There are dark, mysterious forces behind the scenes, manipulating the Empire for sinister gain. The difference here is that instead of a dragon, a sorcerer, or a mad cultist, the big bad in this game is the devil from the Bible.
Shadow, it's me, the devil. I'm here to convince you to do sin. Come with me. Steal candy from babies and small businesses.
With the twins separated during the invasion, Erica sets out with a retinue of loyal knights to reunite with her brother, end the war, and use the titular sacred stones to seal away the Demon King, like some kind of imprisoning war. Now, I just hit you with a couple of those in true Fire Emblem fashions there, but this game's narrative actually does a fair bit to set itself apart from other games in the series. For one thing, the whole geopolitical farce angle is dropped fairly quickly for the more supernatural theming. The conflict is less about defeating the Empire than it is about defeating the Demon King and his forces. A lot of the time, Fire Emblem games will focus mostly on defeating the big bad Empire, sparing only a couple of chapters at the end for focusing on the real villain, if the game even bothers to let you take on the real villain. So I really appreciate Sacred Stones for shifting its focus at least a little bit. It's refreshing. Another refreshing aspect of Sacred Stone's writing is its protagonists. I quite like both Erica and Ephraim, almost as much as they like each other. Sexually. Now, Ephraim is very easy for the player to like. He's hot-headed, competitive, and no nonsense, and he's also fucking incredible in gameplay. Ephraim's growths are absolutely disgusting. He has easy access to those growths with an entire chapter designed specifically to funnel XP into him and only him, and he also gets handed two of the best exclusive weapons in the series just for existing. It's pretty easy to see why Ephraim is a fan favorite. Erica, on the other hand, took a little while for me to come around on. Not because she's poorly written or anything, but because, as Fire Emblem fans tend to, I'd played and replayed this game so many times over the years that I hadn't really read her dialogue in like a decade until the playthrough I did for this video. While Ephraim has stupid broken combat to endear himself to you even when you skip the cutscenes, Erica has anything but. She is decidedly average, if not complete and total ass. She dies to a stiff breeze, and she's very well acquainted with stiff breezes, given that she hits like one. It's pretty easy to write off Erica as another dumpster-tier, sword-locked lord, but what separates her from the likes of Roy, Lynn, and Eliwood is that she actually kinda feels like she's supposed to be this way. Erica isn't a fighter. It's not in her nature. She isn't pursuing martial prowess like her brother is. Hell, the only reason she even knows how to hold a sword is because Ephraim taught her a little bit, and Ephraim doesn't even use swords. In fact, losing a duel to Erica in the past is a point of embarrassment for a character at one point in the story. This is very explicitly not her thing. It just wouldn't make sense for her to be girl-bossing around and soloing maps the same way that Ephraim can. That is Ephraim's thing. Erica's defining traits, on the other hand, are kindness, tenacity, empathy, traits that are just as important in leadership as Ephraim's bold, domineering, competitive nature. Sure, Ephraim can solo maps and take on armies by himself, but while he was out seeking glory and invading the Empire, Erica was home with her father and her people until the very end, and even while she's fleeing for her own life, she goes out of her way to continue to serve the people of Renee. Erica and Ephraim complete each other. It's why the devs made the thematic choice of making them twins. Twins that want to bone each other. When you zoom out a little bit and look at Sacred Stones as a whole package, rather than simply skipping the cutscenes and optimizing the fun out of it like a true Fire Emblem gamer, suddenly Erica's 4 base strength and 5 constitution seem a lot less like an inconvenience and a lot more like a really nice touch. Not that it even really matters that she's bad anyways. To explain what I mean by that, maybe it's time we moved on to the actual game part of this video game discussion. Now, Fire Emblem tends to have this reputation for being a difficult series, at least for outsiders. And you know what? That's totally fair. There's typically a lot of thinking involved, especially for a Nintendo game, and the stakes are also very high. When Mario dies, you lose a life and try again. When a Fire Emblem character dies, you just permanently killed off a unique character with their own personality, dreams, aspirations, and probably a family. From this day forward, you now have to look at yourself in the mirror every single morning and reconcile with the fact that you are the reason Dorcas didn't make it home.
What happened to Dorcas?
Sacred Stones boldly defies series tradition by being piss easy, even on its highest difficulty. Now, unlike later games, there's no casual mode here. Units will still die if they are killed. So despite the low difficulty, the stakes are still high. At the same time though, the risk is incredibly low. It's kinda like if you were wagering your whole life savings away in one bet, but the entire roulette table has been spray painted black. I think you can pretty safely hedge your bets. So what could possibly make Sacred Stones this easy game? After all, it's almost identical mechanically to FE6, a game many consider to be fairly difficult. So what's the discrepancy here? Well, that's kind of a loaded question, which begs a very nuanced answer. You see, Fire Emblem is a complex series with myriad intricate mechanics at play during any given moment of gameplay. Fully contextualizing just what makes Sacred Stones easier than the rest isn't something you can just do in a short video like this. Seth motherfucking Fire Emblem! Never in series history has there been a more iconic broken-ass character. From the word go, from before Chapter 1, during the goddamn prologue, you are given two characters. Erica, your main character, who as previously stated is about as potent in combat as an angry Pomeranian, and Seth, who bends the game over his knee and violently spanks it for 23 chapters straight. So what makes Seth so special? Well, to answer that, first we'll need to talk about Fire Emblem fan terminology. Like everyone else, Fire Emblem fans are mostly humans, meaning our monkey brains are hardwired for pattern recognition. Players with a keen eye have noticed some consistencies in Fire Emblem's design over the years, and these consistencies manifest with different characters that play the same gameplay role across different entries. The collective fan base has grouped these similar characters together by function and dubbed them archetypes, usually naming them after the first or most iconic character within the group. One of, if not the most consistently appearing archetype in Fire Emblem is the Jagan, named for a character you have right from the start of FE1. A Jagan's job is a little different from most other early game Fire Emblem units. As a general rule, the characters you get in the beginning of the game are young, wide-eyed recruits that start out as weak or average, and become stronger by killing enemies, leveling up, and eventually promoting to advanced classes with better perks. Jagans, on the other hand, are usually older combat veterans that are in an advanced class to begin with, usually a paladin. They're bigger, faster, and stronger too. They're the best members of your early game crew. The catch here is that they actually aren't that much stronger. Age is catching up with them, and while years of experience puts them ahead of the pack, their stats actually aren't good at all for a level 1 paladin, and they don't have much more room to grow with terrible growth rates. A Jagan's job is basically to chaperone your weaker units in the early game, then fall off and fade quietly into the background by the mid-game to enjoy retirement. Within the Jagan archetype, there is a subset of Jagans, sometimes considered a separate archetype known as Oifis. Now, the existence or non-existence of Oifis is a bit of a controversial subject, especially given that Oifi himself isn't really an Oifi. I don't know, it's kinda confusing and we're not gonna dwell on it, but the important thing here is that in some games, the Jagan has growth rates that are about on par with your normal units. They still grow slowly at first because they start promoted, and their job in the beginning is still to babysit your growth units. But instead of falling off, Oifis eventually start growing at a similar rate to your other units and integrate themselves into your team as an average to good unit. A good example of this would be not fucking Seth. Get that fake ass archetype out. Seth is double the Jagan, none of the drawbacks. Seth starts out with absolutely insane bonkers ass stats. Seth's bases would be good if he joined in the mid game. Yet here he is in the prologue, the first unit you get. For context of how absolutely borked these bases are, let's look at Franz, the level 1 cavalier you get in Chapter 1. Still the very beginning of the game for all intents and purposes, but still after Seth regardless, just to rub salt in the wound. Seth's bases are so high that on average, a level 1 Seth is arguably better than a Franz that has grown to level 10 and promoted. All of this investment, 9 levels worth of XP, and a Knight's Crest, just to usually get a second base Seth with worse weapon ranks 6 or 7 chapters later at the earliest. And keep in mind, there's always a chance your Franz turns out bad and that base Seth is just objectively better at the same level anyways. But you wanna know the craziest part? You won't even have base Seth by then. You'll probably have a Seth that has gained a few levels, and for some ungodly, unfathomable reason, Rather than having middling growth so he can eventually fall in line with the rest of your army, he has some of the best growths in the entire game. His growths are better than Franz, and Franz is a growth unit. And even though he gains experience more slowly than other units thanks to being promoted, you can feed him the boss kills for a hefty chunk of XP even in the early game, meaning that alongside the chip XP he'll be getting from steamrolling any other enemy he touches, Seth will only be further snowballing, pulling even further ahead of your army. Seth makes Franz look absolutely worthless, and that's so fucked up, because Franz is one of the best units in the entire game! Okay, now, there are units in the series that are technically more broken than Seth. If I had to pick the most overpowered unit in Fire Emblem, it would probably be Robin. But the thing is, Seth isn't taking advantage of crazy, unbalanced mechanics like avatar customization, unlimited Nosferatu, and pair-up like Robin. Seth is just a disgusting monster by virtue of having bigger numbers than everyone else. He doesn't need game-breaking mechanics because he is the game-breaking mechanic. Fill this man's inventory with javelins, and congratulations, you have created the Fire Emblem Killdozer. And as the absurd icing on the world's most unbalanced cake, Seth is a paladin. This means that he has 8 movement while the rest of your army is stuck with 5. If he was a general or something, you know, a great wall of death slowly lumbering towards the enemy at the same pace as your scrubs, then maybe he'd be a little less hilariously busted. But no. Sending Seth to go kill everything is not only the easiest way out, it is also the most efficient and expedient way out in basically every circumstance. Whether it's a casual playthrough, an Iron Man, or a 0% growth low turn count speedrun, Seth is your guy by a country fucking light year. Seth is beyond centralizing. The game doesn't just revolve around him. Seth's gravitational pull is so strong that he has collapsed in on himself and devoured the entirety of Sacred Stones in one Seth singularity. And yet, if you took Seth out of the game, not nerfed him, just completely removed him from existence, didn't replace him with anything, Sacred Stones would still probably be the easiest Fire Emblem game. Put Seth in any other game and he'd be pretty good anyways. But Seth in this game is beyond being a big fish in a small pond. It's like trying to keep a plesiosaur in my fucking bathtub. Sacred Stones being easy, Seth aside, comes down to a pair of simple factors. First of all, the enemies are just really weak. The exact same enemy types that would give you trouble in other Fire Emblem games on the same system simply don't here. The stats just aren't there. I don't know exactly what they did when they were tuning the numbers between entries, but this game won't start to feel like FE6 until you increase the enemy growths by about 30%. It's not just any old GBA enemies either though. Sacred Stones also introduces a whole host of new enemies, those being the Demon King's monster army. Many of them are repurposed Gaiden enemies, but there are a handful of brand new beasties here as well. We've got Revenants, which are basically just big blobs of HP, Bone Walkers, which are just weak weapon-wielding foot soldiers, but they're skeletons, and Gargoyles, which are kinda just weaker Pegasus Knights. Beyond that, there are Bales, Cyclops, Centaurs, Moth Dogs, the unblinking ones, you name it. There's a pretty huge variety in the combat roles these monsters can play, many of which are unique from what the regular enemies can provide. But like the rest of Sacred Stone's enemies, the stats just aren't there for them either. If anything, these guys are even weaker than the usual suspects. Alongside the playthrough I did for this video's footage, I also did a playthrough of Sacred Stones with 60% increased enemy growths. While these insane buffs made your average mercenaries, myrmidons, fighters, and mages downright dangerous, I found myself breathing a sigh of relief whenever I was made to do the monster mash. The terrors just don't scale, even with a lot of help. The only time these guys pose any kind of threat is in the infamous Phantom Ship chapter, a completely out-of-left-field difficulty spike that employs fog of war, cramped spaces that impede your formations while still providing enemy flyers freedom of movement, massive swarms of enemies, and a side objective that involves protecting a squishy NPC unit. It seems like everything in this chapter is meticulously designed to simulate the experience of lodging a toothpick under your big toenail and kicking a door. But even then, even when the game does everything in its power to threaten you with these monsters, I still think the fear of this chapter is a little dramatic. You have multiple units in your army that are functionally invincible by default, like Dusel and Seth, and you could also train characters like the Cavaliers or Gilliam to be also functionally invincible. You can simply weather the storm and push forward with a minimal chance of death. It's definitely a step harder than the rest of the game for sure, but it still falls apart once you leverage all of your resources. And to make matters worse for Sacred Stones on the difficulty front, these easier monster enemies are pretty much all you fight for the last few chapters, and by that point you also have an entire arsenal of explicitly anti-monster weapons and resources, which you probably won't even need, that just further solidify the complete and total steamroll. Weak bad guys aren't the only thing making Sacred Stones easy though. The poor quality enemies mean that Sacred Stones is fighting with one hand behind its back, yes, but the fight gets even more unfair when the player pulls up to the street fight in an A10 Warthog. The second factor that completely breaks Sacred Stones is your power level. Almost every unit in Sacred Stones ranges from extremely solid to stupid good. I've already told you all about Seth, but Seth aside, pretty much any unit is more than capable of soloing the entire game fairly easily. And that's not even just conjecture. This Kratos NVN guy on YouTube is meticulously going through every single character and soloing the game with them. But even units that can't exactly snap Sacred Stones in half are still leagues better than their contemporaries. Naomi, for example, may be a weak early game archer, but using her isn't some kind of Herculean meme task like it is trying to make Wolt or Will work. It's suboptimal for sure, but it only takes a few levels for her to start one-rounding monsters and flyers, all the while doing consistently helpful chip damage. And this is all assuming you're being a good boy and just flat out not using any of the game-breaking mechanics the game practically begs you to exploit to further smash the game into a billion itty-bitty pieces. One of the many pages Sacred Stones takes out of Gaiden's book is a world map. Monster skirmishes will spawn pretty much any time you reload it, which you can then use to grind infinite experience points, allowing even your left-behind shitters and late-joining benchwarmers to catch up and snowball with ease. But you know what? You can just ignore that shit, even if you want to grind. Instead, head on over to the Tower of Volney, home of game design. The Tower of Volney is a dungeon full of glorified XP balloon monsters that you can continuously exploit on the same easy map over and over and over again with basically zero risk to funnel a massive amount of XP into any unit, thus turning them into an actual thermonuclear ballistic missile in 15 minutes. What a cool and difficult strategy video game. Wait. All of that being said though, I honestly think it's a good thing that Sacred Stones is so easy. At the very least, even if it's not a strength, I don't think it's a weakness either. It's normal for long-running series like Fire Emblem to fluctuate a little bit in difficulty between entries, and it's healthy for there to be easier games that can serve as entry points for new players. Sacred Stones is great insofar as it's a very safe, low-pressure environment in which new players can get the true Fire Emblem experience. Newer games offer things like casual mode as an option for less experienced players, and while I'm not here to be the arbiter of how people play video games, I do think something is lost when you completely strip Fire Emblem of its stakes. Difficulty is a fine thing to tweak, play on easy mode for all I care, but casual mode doesn't just make it hard to lose, it basically cuts out the ability to lose at all. I really think it's a poorly designed and poorly implemented mechanic. This is the one place where I will dig my heels in and gatekeep like my life depends on it. My Fire Emblem purity crusade aside though, the relaxed environment of Sacred Stones also makes it a very fun way to experience some of the series' other greatest joys, like training child soldiers. Sure, it might be more optimal to just have Seth steamroll everything, but there's something so satisfying about watching a growth unit gain experience, level up, get those big stat gains, and improve over the course of the game. Sacred Stones in particular really leans into this aspect of Fire Emblem, with the aforementioned infinite grinding, and even 3 special trainee units whose whole purpose is to go from 0, child, to hero, child soldier. There's Ross, a young axe fighter, Ewan, an apprentice mage, and Amelia, who is bad in general.
Leave me alone! Akira!
They all start out extremely underpowered, with horrible stats and classes that don't even qualify as base classes. It takes them 10 levels to promote into a regular level 1 unit. But watching these characters grow level after level, gaining stat point after stat point, and promoting twice, is beyond satisfying, and it's just one of those things where the journey is more important than the destination, especially because their growths are so bad they just end up average anyway. God damn it! The whole journey of Sacred Stones is enhanced even further by its presentation. The game is actually really pretty. It's definitely the visual peak of 2D Fire Emblem, at least in my opinion. The reused animations from FE6 and 7 for the basic classes still look great, but the new animations that were made specifically for Sacred Stones are a cut above. Like, just look at the fluidity in Ephraim's lance strikes, or how unsettling and meticulous the monster's movements are, or the way the trainee classes visually display their inexperience with their animations. You can tell the artists who worked on this game really honed their craft over the multiple years of working with this engine. And honestly, I think Sacred Stones continued to be the best looking game in the series for a long time after. Path of Radiance animations look like they're being performed by alien lizards trying to approximate what human movement should look like. Radiant Dawn has a bit less of this, but it's still present. Shadow Dragon is fugly, and FE12 is ever so slightly less fugly. Awakening has gorgeous cutscenes and nice portraits, but really boring combat animations with characters gliding around everywhere and not having feet. It took until Fates for the series to have this same kind of visual detail and fluidity in its combat animations, and it wasn't really until Shadows of Valentia that I'd say the 3D style really matched Sacred Stone's level of polish. Then Three Houses came out and decided to ugly pill everyone all over again. Why is it always you, Three Houses? Why is it always you? Now, it's not hard to see why there's this discrepancy between 2D and 3D. The GBA's graphics allow for you to do a lot with a little. It takes a lot more resources to make these 3D animations look good, but in 2D, with these small-scale sprites, while it definitely takes skill, any schmuck with a computer and the know-how can reasonably do it. That's why GBA Fire Emblem, chiefly Sacred Stones these days, is the basis for so many ROM hacks with beautiful fan-made animations. I guess this whole deranged rant about Sacred Stones is to say, I absolutely adore this game. I've played Sacred Stones a lot, over and over again for decades now, doing different challenge runs, randomizers, draft races, you name it. But the playthrough I did for this video was the first time in a long time I've really slowed down and appreciated Sacred Stones, looking at it as a whole package rather than a simple vehicle for dangerously autistic levels of Fire Emblem fuckery. It's a really beautiful game, both in its visual presentation and its execution as a tactical RPG. And while it definitely skews towards the easy end of things, I think that's probably a good thing for anyone who isn't in the Fire Emblem trenches like me. And let's face it, if you are in the Fire Emblem trenches like me, and you know enough to completely trivialize Sacred Stones, you probably also know how to use the randomizer to increase the enemy's growths and insert some challenge. And you know what? When you do give the enemies some teeth, Sacred Stone's map design really shines. Seriously, when I was doing my playthrough with increased enemy growths, I really came to appreciate just how quality a lot of these chapters are. Chapter 5, Chapter 6, and Ephraim Chapter 10 are some really good early game examples, and as the story progresses, the whole game is just elevated to a whole new level. There's a challenging, fun Fire Emblem game buried just beneath the surface here, and while I technically can't give Sacred Stones credits for things that mods do, this isn't really a formal review, so I'm gonna give it credit anyway. Fact of the matter is, at every level, whether you've never touched a Fire Emblem game before, or your entire identity revolves around this series, there's something for you in Sacred Stones, and I give it my wholehearted recommendation. I just wish there was more discussion about this game online. I never really see it talked about outside of the designated Fire Emblem spaces. It's a weird game for a GBA Fire Emblem, but compared to some of the series' more wacky adventures, it blends in more than you would think, rendering it fairly inert as a point of discussion, even in those Fire Emblem spaces, beyond saying, yeah, that's the easy game. And as far as the general public goes, the outlook is even worse. It seems like every other entry has something to keep it in the public consciousness. The games from Awakening Beyond, for example, are mainstream enough that even some average Joes actually picked them up. I have coworkers that I can talk about Three Houses and engage with. My old boss played Awakening and Fates, and a buddy of mine played Shadows of Valentia back in the day, and he doesn't really care about Nintendo or RPGs at all. Granted, the fact that I'm talking about Fire Emblem in public at all means that I should be banished from polite society, but that's beside the point. And while the other games before Awakening are also somewhat obscure, at least they have Super Smash Bros. Going for them. Ike, Marth, and Roy bring a certain level of recognition to their origins. You could probably point at the cover of Path of Radiance, and it wouldn't be too crazy for someone to say, oh, that's Ike from Smash Bros. But Sacred Stones? There's nothing to really point to. Outside of the Japan exclusives, this is the most Fire Emblem people only Fire Emblem game. Sacred Stones really just feels like an outlier. I've barely talked about this game anywhere but online. This is anecdotal, but I only know 2 people in real life who have played this game, one of which I introduced to Fire Emblem. So that's one person that I've ever found out in the wild. And I've met my fair share of people in Sacred Stone's 20 years of existence. So if you can take one thing away from this video, I implore you, give this old gray sheep a try. If you've never touched Fire Emblem, it's the perfect starting point. If you've only played the modern games, you'll still feel mostly right at home playing Sacred Stones. And if you have already played this game, I don't know, play it again.